fortunate enough this evening to be joined by the one and the only Bob Partika of Titletown Muskies, Inc. Bob has quite the history with Green Bay Muskies and a ton of involvement, and I cannot appreciate him more for taking the time to be with me tonight. So thank you, Bob.
It's an honor. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Really appreciate you hanging out, and I really wanted to have you on because of your perspective on Green Bay, not only because, like, obviously you are a very skilled fisherman and a hell of a stick, but also because you have a perspective on some of the DNR stocking biology of these fish that not a lot of people have, that I think is really valuable and really insightful, because, like, I'm just a nerd and I want to learn as much as I possibly can about these fish, because I feel like the more that I learn, the easier it is to catch fish. Brady, what's up? I just pulled this out a second ago to talk about it later, maybe. How's it going, dude?
Hey, Brady. Good to see you, brother.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Bob. I got distracted there by Brady, the beast from out east.
Oh, yeah.
But so from your perspective, I don't want to talk too much here, but from your perspective, like, what are some things with Green Bay, like the history of Green Bay, kind of through your eyes, like when you started, kind of working so closely with the chapter, how the fishery was when you kind of began, and kind of where it is today.
Sure. Well, for those who don't know, everybody knows that Green Bay's got some big fish out here, and it's just a lot of water. We got 1.04 million acres. So essentially we've got, Lake of the Woods right in our own backyard here. But, you can catch fish everywhere. And that's one thing that I'll touch upon later if you want to make a note of that. Differences of fishing out here, just the mindset versus inland fishing. It's completely different. But we can get into that a little bit later. But these muskies are native to the area. They were fairly abundant up until the 1900s, around the early to mid 20th century. They were almost completely extirpated, almost completely wiped out due to pollution. There's a lot of paper manufacturing around here, which uses a lot of chemicals, PCBs, things like that leach into the sediment and kills off a lot of the vegetation and the habitat for all species, really. But muskies were especially impacted by that. And I'd say by the mid 20th century, they were almost completely wiped out. However, in 1989, the first Muskies, Inc. chapter in Green Bay was approached by the DNR and the state to help out with a reintroduction program that they were looking to do. Again, these fish are native, but they were almost gone, so wanted to see what we could do in order to get some fish back in. And number one, we had no idea if they would even survive. At the time, I know the first president of the Muskies, Inc. chapter back then, Dave Mann, came to our chapter last winter and did a great presentation on, the old days. And he says back then, the guys in the chapter, most of those guys were fishing up north, northern Wisconsin. Even though they live in Green Bay, they were adamant against wasting money. They figured it was a waste to put money into stocking the bay. They said, you'll never see a muskie out here ever, ever, ever. It's just a waste of money. Well, they still move forward, and so they got some broodstock fish from multiple places, all Great Lakes spotted strain muskies. They got some from Michigan.
Were those originally from the bay then, those original broods, or were those Great Lakes fish from a different location?
Great Lakes from different locations. We got some from the Michigan DNR, as well as the Ministry of Wildlife from Ontario. We got some fish from Lake Huron, as well as the Indian Spread Chain, which is in lower Michigan, but it's got access to the Great Lakes. And those fish were actually brought back here, and look where we are now. So we've got a really, really healthy fishery. It's a work in progress. It's a success story in the making. How I term it, there's a lot that's going on right now as far as habitat restoration, improved stocking efforts, getting smart about where we're actually stocking these fish. And I think that the future looks very, very bright. So that's where we're at now. But we can get into like a lot of the programs that we're involved in as a chapter for Titletown Muskies, Inc. here in Green Bay. So as far as like when I started fishing out here, I'm not originally from Green Bay. I've lived here about 20 years. But when I started fishing out here, I would say heavily, that was the end of what people consider the good old days. where it was tough to find a fish under 47 inches out here. When their guys were popping, they have 7, 8, 9 fish days or more sometime. These fish were just stupid, uneducated. But, that's great for people who want to go out and catch big fish, but it's not so good for people who are concerned about the future of the fishery. We've got no upcoming year classes to replace these fish once they kick the bucket. So our chapter has been very, very involved in making sure that we are directing our efforts towards getting huge swath of year classes out here. Whereas now, we got out here last year. I popped 3 fish that were under 30. I couldn't even register them with Muskies Inc. in the lunge log. So,
for a
people
place
are like,
like
"Oh
that,
my
that's
God!"
a good thing.
Exactly. People are like, "Oh my goodness, I got a dink. It's only 34 and a half." I'm doing cartwheels in my heart because these are future 50s. Is how I look at them. Mm-hmm. So, when I see some of these smaller fish out there, and we're seeing a lot of fish, I would say all around the 30 range, and then some low 40s as well. In addition to the, the big girls that we got out here, and big boys too. Right. So, it's looking pretty good right now. I know a lot of good younger year class fish that were caught last year, past several years.
No, that's really awesome. I think that the forest gets lost through the trees get lost through the forest, however that expression goes, when you catch those smaller fish, especially on a fishery like Green Bay, to where it's such a vast thing that those year classes can definitely get lost. It's not like my reservoir lakes here where the equivalent of surface acres go in every other year, and you kind of know that there's different year classes, but there's always fish up and coming. And I think something really interesting too is that I didn't realize that those fish were transplanted Great Lake fish to restore the population in Green Bay. So are those the same strain of fish that you would find in maybe Georgian Bay, or are those a different strain of fish?
Yep. All the stuff you see on the St. Lawrence River, Lake St. Clair, Green Bay, Georgian Bay, those are all Great Lakes spotted muskies. There is a wide variety of patterns that you'll see on these fish too. Some of them look striped and barred. Some of them looks, like we call them leopards. Mm-hmm. So there's a wide variety of patterns, but they're all Great Lakes spotted muskies.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. Apparently some of these people think you look like Jack Black, Bob, which is ironic because I know that you play guitar just like me. So
I'm a hack, but
I don't play nearly as often as I used to. Let's put it that way. So being so involved with the chapter and being a chapter officer for so long, how did you kind of start this relationship with the DNR, or foster the relationship with the DNR, and then kind of move it along to the point to where you were able to really work together to change this fishery?
This is a multi-pronged effort. Number one, we've got the DNR, the biologists that we work closely with, and then we've also got the conservation side of the house, which is the wardens and things like that. On the warden side, I'll start there. It was a bit of an adversarial relationship for a long time. People always looked at wardens as, hey, they're always out to get you for something. So what we eventually did back in the mid-teens is we started bringing the wardens in. We just said, listen, come on in, talk about what you're doing out there, what you're seeing, and what people need to realize is we're on the same team. And this is how we basically forged the narrative within our organization and eventually changed the mindset. Insofar as, we see it as a partnership rather than an adversarial relationship. So on that end, now every spring, right before our opener, we have our opener on the bay is Memorial Day weekend, the Saturday closest to Memorial Day. And in our May meeting, which is the second Wednesday of every month, so a couple weeks prior, we bring in the wardens just to give us an update on, hey, what they're seeing out in the bay right now, if they need our help with anything. Just letting our chapter members know that we need to be their eyes and ears out there. If we see something, say something. Everybody has a right to these fish who's purchased a license, but they need to make sure that they're adhering to the regulations fully. And if we see somebody out here solo trolling with 4 lines, we get 3 lines per person. We see them with 4 lines. That's an unfair advantage that they've got versus, all the other people who are abiding by the law. Likewise, we see people out here almost every year, invariably, there's guys out here the week before the opener. I'll cross the 172 bridge over the Fox River, and there's somebody down there hucking and chucking, figure eighting and stuff. And, it's the season isn't open yet. Mm-hmm. So we'll notify the wardens and that, it's not a snitch mentality. It's, making sure that people understand what the rules and regulations are and just making sure that they abide by them. We've had a lot of outreach to local media as well. We usually bring the news crews in. We give them a heads up when we're going to do the egg collection. And we also make sure that we put something in there that, hey, this is when the season starts. I know everybody's excited to see these big fish that we get when we do our egg collection, but you need to be mindful that the season isn't open yet. We make sure that they specifically state that it opens Saturday, Memorial Day. So, that's been very helpful as well to minimize the amount of, out of season angling that we see. So those are some of the things we've been doing on the conservation side, the conservation wardens. But as far as the actual biologists, we had a recent change probably about 4 years ago. We got a new biologist, the old biologist, who was in charge of all management throughout the entire Green Bay watershed, retired. And we had a really good relationship with him. Now, with the new leadership that we've got here with Jason Bregeman, who's just been an absolute dream to work with, really encourages our involvement in as many aspects of the entire process as possible, from the egg collection that we do in the fyke netting surveys in the spring to you name it. Oh, also helping out with identifying areas for potential stocking out in the bay itself. And I can get into that a little bit later too on some of the programs that we've got. But that was, it's just a matter of, I guess, right person with the right mindset. We're super fortunate. I understand that, some other areas and counties don't have the greatest relationship with their biologists or their wardens, what have you. But, it still behooves everybody to go out and at least make the effort. There's, a lot of, I guess, negative attitude toward the management of certain systems, things like that. What you need to start with is an open dialogue. Let them know where you're coming from, what your concerns are, and listen. Sometimes the biologist will tell you, listen, here's why we can't do that. Here's why it doesn't make sense from a scientific standpoint to, say, put a 50-inch size limit on a 120-acre lake. You're not going to get 50s in there. It can't support 50s. So,
right.
So just things like that. The main thing is establishing a dialogue, listening, and making sure that everybody's concerns are heard on both sides, and then just trying to find a happy medium there. And we've been super, super fortunate.
So Ron brings up a good point. It's interesting because he's talking about how DeSantis changed some of the regulations down there related to their fisheries for hurricanes, or because of the hurricane season. And I think it's interesting that he brings that up because, like, Wisconsin, by and large, is in a similar position where, you guys rely a lot, or your local economies, some of the local economies rely a lot on tourism dollars and people coming up and adventuring. Like, how many people, go to Green Bay to try and catch that double nickel? It's probably, it's probably my closest best shot at a double nickel for the majority of the year. Now, I think like Mille Lacs, probably there's a time and a window in there, and if you hit the window right, there might be a better shot at that fish on Mille Lacs. But at the same time, I think, like, for consistency's sake, like, Green Bay is definitely my closest best option. And you see that too, like in the Northwoods, when a lot of those communities up there, smaller ones, like up in Hayward, for example, a lot of those communities really rely on those tourism dollars. And it's not just muskies, but, like, there's a definitive incentive structure for the local economies, whether it's Florida, whether it's, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Canada, that, those fish are there, healthy and ready to be caught. Because if one of those, like, if one of those Jenga blocks gets upset, then things can topple over really fast. Do you, Bob, have any idea, like, off the cuff? I know we're just kind of bantering here a little bit, but, like, off the cuff, with, like, what the numbers are, like the stocking goals for some of these, for, like, Green Bay, for example. Like, is there a number of fish, like, in an ideal year that you want to put in the bay to get kind of the the success rate that your chapter, that your DNR is looking to achieve?
Yep. Number one, these limits and goals are all set by the DNR. They do solicit our input as well. We were told by some biologists years ago that, hey, if we could stock 1 million fish, this system can hold it. That's one fish per acre. However, we are limited insofar as the amount of hatchery space that we have that's specifically dedicated to muskies. And our chapter has recently funded some expansion of that over the past 3-4 years. So we've got a 4-year commitment to the Wild Rose Hatchery, which is where we collect the eggs in the spring from the Fox River. Those eggs are then sent to the Wild Rose Hatchery. It's about an hour and a half from here. And they're reared there, raised, and then released back into the system. So we've got goals basically as much as we can fit, as much as we can collect.
Sure.
And whatever fits in the limited space that we have, we will maximize that. And some years are better than others as far as how many fish we actually get. But we're thankful to get anytime we get any fish out here. A lot of our chapter had some volunteers that went out to the Wild Rose Hatchery and participated in the fin clipping of some of these fingerlings. They're going to be released that fall. Those were, God, I think we had like 17,000 or somewhere around there. Dang. That were released to the bay proper. So that's a good, healthy number. The numbers were very, very respectable. We'll just put it that way. And we're happy to get the fish that we can.
Well, and I know that our DNR here in Iowa is not experimenting, but kind of in the trial stage of some new stuff. Like they're trying this new thing called RAS, which is I think it's recirculated aquaculture systems, I think is what it stands for. Mm-hmm. Don't quote me on that. But basically the idea is that they have heaters in the water so that these fish can grow faster, bigger, faster in the same amount of time. So instead of, your yearly fingerling being 12 to 15 inch fish, these fish are going to be between 17 and 20 inches long, which should, based on preliminary data, change the mortality where we're having good or lower mortality, around 50 to around 50%, half of them are living, that mortality will change to 20% or even less, which would be huge.
And 50% is still very good. 50% is still very good.
Yeah, and it's so the lakes where they do better mortality wise, it's very obvious. They just have more cover, so they can avoid other fish, other birds. We don't have the pike issue that a lot of people or a lot of lakes in Wisconsin will have, where they have literally bigger fish. The only things that can eat muskies in our lakes when they're stocked are muskies and 6-pound bass, which, I mean, you're talking less than 5% of the bass population can snarf one of those down. And birds are a huge issue, but that's kind of anywhere. So, and I know that they're doing some things too, stocking through the ice kind of thing, during that hard water period, just drilling a hole and sending them down there. So it'll be interesting to see how those results pan out. Unfortunately, I think this year there was some sort of parasite or bug that got into those fish and really decimated them bad. So that progress is going to be delayed a little bit, unfortunately.
In line with what you were just mentioning about the size of the fish that are stocked, we found that years ago that the magic number seems to be 13 inches. There was pretty high mortality rate on fish that were released. We collect the eggs in the spring and we raise them over the summer and release them in the fall. So, just several months later. And those are typically around, they average about 11 inches or so. However, the DNR also used to overwinter a certain portion of those fish. And those are actually, fed over the winter and released the following spring, anywhere minimum of 13 inches all the way up to 17, 18 inches. And we found that the survivability went up exponentially on those fish. Again, there's not as many predators out there that can eat fish of that size, but that certainly helped as well. And one other thing I want to mention about the stocking programs, not just on Green Bay, but everywhere. What people need to understand is this is an inexact science. There are no hard, fast rules that work for every single system across the board. It is a little bit of trial and error, and sometimes things work, and sometimes they don't. what people need to understand also is that these biologists don't live in a bubble. They're also talking to other biologists throughout the entire, country. There's an actual panel that is made up of, I forgot how many exact states, at least probably like 9 or 10 states, where it's an ESACID or ESACID panel of biologists from all over the Midwest and out east a little bit. They just talk about muskie and pike management. So they're talking about best practices and ways that, so they can share information. Hey, here's what worked for us over here. Maybe it would work for you, or maybe if you tweak it a little bit, it might work for you over, in your system. So there is a lot of communication that's going on behind the scenes that a lot of people really aren't privy to, that they need to take into consideration. And, these biologists, they know what they're doing. They're trained scientists. And again, it's not an exact science, but we are well on our way towards, making we've made a lot of great improvements over the years, and we're looking forward to more improvements as we move forward.
Yeah, no, that's totally awesome. Ron, to answer your question, the warmer weather has kind of extended the bite, but I think the rubber band's going to snap back this weekend because we've had we're going to have some really cold weather here soon. That's going to really change things in a hurry. And as for the Dolphins, if you'd believe it, I am a Dolphins fan here in the middle of the Midwest my whole life, and I'm not really certain that there's anything that I can do to arrange a victory for the Dolphins other than try and do your best to keep Tua healthy. But that's my 2 cents on pro football. I don't provide too much commentary on that. So, yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on why Green Bay has been so successful in partnering with the DNR. So there's something that has come about very recently with Southern Wisconsin that I think we really need to talk about, and I don't honestly think it's been talked about enough in Muskie circles. I mean, there's like whispers about it, but like, and maybe it's just like people don't know, but the Wisconsin DNR has been stocking Great Lakes strain fish in a select variety of southern Wisconsin lakes. So being that you have been around these fish for these fish, stocked these fish, done all these things, like, what are your thoughts on that? And like, what do you think their odds of success are? Are we going to be turning out some Cisco eating freaks? Like, what is, just you take it, Bob.
Well, you're right. They are starting to stock a lot of our we call them spots, basically, Great Lakes spotted strain muskies in a lot of inland systems. Up around us in northern Wisconsin, they're stocking them in a lot of inland areas that are primarily reservoirs with access to the Great Lakes, to the Bay of Green Bay. For instance, the Peshtigo River. Upstream of the Peshtigo River, you've got several flowages. They're actually stocking some of those. Granted, some of those fish will escape and will make it out back to the bay. But, we're interested to see, number one, how well they survive. Number two, will they outcompete the native strains that are in there, the barred strain? And number three, are they going to reproduce? And our barred fish are gorgeous fish, and our spots are gorgeous fish. If they get together, we're going to have some of those beautiful specimens out on the planet right now.
Oh, no doubt about that.
So we're interested. Yeah, we're interested to see how that works out. So that's kind of, they just started doing that in 2021. So we are very, very early on in the process. I know one lake that was stocked in the fall of 2021. This is a northeast Wisconsin system. Somebody popped in the spring of 2023 a spot that was 31 inches. So it was released at, say, 11 inches on average, and it grew 20 inches in a year and a half. So that fish is doing well. Are the others, I haven't really fished that system much at all, so it's tough to tell. But as far as the southern Wisconsin lakes, I'm not too involved, and I don't really follow the stocking programs down there. I'm involved with, insofar as I support them everywhere I can. I fish Suckerfest every fall, which with proceeds that go towards Muskie Clubs of Wisconsin and stocking efforts in the Pewaukee, Waukesha area lakes, Pewaukee, Oconomowoc, Waukachi, stuff like that. But I know you're probably thinking like Geneva, when we're talking about some of these big lakes and deep lakes and
volume and area. Just, yeah.
There already are some big fish in there. There's big fish in there already.
Yes.
And the guys from the Muskies Inc. chapters and some other conservation organizations from Illinois have been stocking the bejesus out of it for the past several years, and there's some really nice fish. I have never fished that system, but I'm hearing some reports, some guys that are having a lot of success out there who are able to pattern them and have been on some really big fish. Now, what's going to happen when the spots start getting big? On average, our fish on the bay, the 8-year-old female will be 45 inches on the bay.
That's like that's like a 12 to 14-year-old fish here.
At least. And we get 50 inches that are a dozen years old. So yeah. Whereas up north, a 50 incher is well over 20 years old probably. But that said, we're watching closely to see how that pans out. It's going to be interesting because Geneva's probably going to be spitting out some really big fish. It's already got big fish in it, but it's just sure. So things are looking really, really good down there. One other thing about the stocking of some of these inland systems as well is there's been kind of a mixed bag of response from some of the anglers themselves. Some guys are all for it. Hey, just more muskies. We don't care what strain they are. Whereas other guys are more purists and, really love the fish that are in there, the natural fish. But you figure, like, for instance, the Peshtigo River, it's got several reservoirs upstream from that. And, back before mankind was around to build these dams and everything, these fish were free to swim up and down as they wished. So now that we've got some man-made impediments to that, they're going to put them in there again and see what happens. So, are they going to survive and thrive, or are they going to, escape and make it back out to the bay? Or there's going to be a bunch of fish that are going to do well no matter where they're at. They're apex predators.
Sure.
And I don't care what strain it is, they're an apex predator in any system that they're in. And they're opportunists, and they will make the best out of every situation you put them in.
Well, and if those lakes are kind of like the ones that I have around here, where the bait to predator ratio is generally weighted more towards the bait, like like more predators isn't necessarily going to be a bad thing in those systems. I guess just from my personal experience, from like my own little microscopic view from fishing our lakes and just kind of seeing the ebbs and the flows of bait and how that changes from a year-to-year basis. I've said it for years, but the fisheries that I fish in Iowa, there is a very specific and interesting connection between the healthiest fisheries that kick out 14, 15, 16-inch crappies, 5, 6, 7-pound bass. They have one thing in common, and that thing is muskies. The muskies are in there to weed out all of the stuff that shouldn't be in there or is too weak to make it function appropriately. And then you just have better genetics from the spawns. You have everything is just better that way. And yeah, I mean, if a bass fisherman has a muskie come grab their bass during a tournament, then I guess just deal with it. But that bass probably wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the muskie in the first place. So, but Dean, to answer your question, the Ridgeway has been the ticket the last couple weekends for us here in Iowa. We've had temps between 46 and 50 degrees, and I don't know why the Ridgeway is just pulling so much. We've had other baits running like dive and rise, rubber. I've been running the Bam Bams a ton. But the Ridgeway, the last 2 weekends, the Ridgeway has gotten 3 out of the 4 fish in the boat, which is pretty dope.
Those the 9 inches?
Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Are those the 9 inches?
Yes, the one that this is the 9-inch night eye. The one that has been crushing is the 9-inch crappie. And then to answer Ron's question, what is the difference between warm water and cooler water related to musky fishing? I guess, I don't know. You can piggyback off this a little bit too, Bob, but I would say like the warm water period or the warmer water musky fishing would be like 60 degrees and up to like safe temps, like 60 to whatever, 75, 77, whatever you want to call it. And then anything below 60, I'd say you're starting to get cooler. And that's when I start to think about significantly changing my approach based on those temps. I don't know. You've been doing this longer than me. Any thoughts on that?
We do the same thing, same exact thing. And you're spot on, is once we see water temps start to drop, what we look for here in our neck of the woods is, a lot of our lakes turn over as well. Whereas the cooler, denser water on the bottom all season long, if you look on your 2D sonar, you can see it. If you're in a, say a 50-foot deep basin, you can see 24 feet down, everything's dark down there. Looks like a whole cloud down there. That's the cooler, denser water. Well, the warmer water up top eventually begins to drop in temperature as well until it reaches the same temperature as the water on the bottom, and it flips over. And it could be some tough sledding immediately after that happens. Some lakes turn over, within a day or two. Some lakes may take a week or more to turn over. It could be a more gradual process. Depends on the weather, depends on the lake, everything. But we do pay attention to water temps quite a bit here. And in the fall, I'm mostly out on the bay until I'm casting, typically until October or so. Early October, depends on whether we've still got some green weeds out there. Most of the folks out here transition to trolling in mid-September. That's when the shad start moving down that west shore. And guys who have been casting all summer typically transition to trolling. But there's still a handful of fish to be had casting. So, I'm out there banging away, but I'm essentially looking for a needle in a haystack. But, they're out there. There's some out there. Totally. My odds are not as great as, say, trolling, and anywhere near as good as trolling. But, I love casting, and for me, the tug is the drug. So,
sure.
So,
I get
but
that.
Once the fall comes around, I don't troll too much in the bay. Don't get me wrong, I've done plenty of it. But my passion is going inland, and I love live bait fishing. In fact, I'm going tomorrow. In fact, I drove like 3 hours today to pick up some suckers. Nice. They made a 3-hour trip because nobody else around town has them. So we're going to be heading out tomorrow morning and going to soak the meat. But that's primarily what I do once the water temps start getting into the 50s or so.
Totally. Well, good luck on that. So we had some other questions here. So we had something about pike harvest / musky harvest. I'm assuming since this guy lives in Florida, he's probably not super familiar with some of that. So I guess we can dive into the history of that a little bit, which I keep tons of pike. Pike are freaking delicious. I've got like 4 jars. I've got like 6 jars of pickled pike, courtesy of my buddy Barry, in my fridge right now. So freaking good. Pike. Love them. It is hard to beat pickled pike on a cracker, sipping on like a light beer, watching your favorite football team. It's the little things. If you're into the sound of music and singing on hilltops about things that you like, that would be right up there for me. But as far as like keeping muskies go, like, so when before Callie's grandma, my wife's grandpa passed away, he would talk about how in the past in Hayward, like, people would keep muskies all the time. And like they'd have these big events.
There was no such thing as catch and release. It didn't exist.
There was no such thing, and they'd have these big events where they'd invite all the neighbor people, and they'd come and they'd grill them. But then like the '80s came around, and no one could catch muskies anymore because like there were no muskies to catch. So like the biggest thing is like if you want fish to catch, you got to put them back. And I'll make it a little addendum to that I don't think it's talked about enough, especially in my state, because I see. Every now and then a random hill person will catch one and keep it to eat, or you got some guy who wants to keep one just to try it. Iowa's water quality is the bottom 5 in the state. Now, I'm not going to get into a diatribe about the legislative aspects of that and how Iowa needs to do more to advocate for better water quality. That's a battle my father has fought as a conservationist, his entire career. But my point with that being is like, do you really want to put – so the limit for Iowa is 40 inches, which if you catch one, it's your legal right. You can keep it. I'm not saying that I agree with it, but at the same point, you can do that. But a 40-inch fish in Iowa is between 10 and 12 years old, or 8 and 12 years old, depending on the sex of that fish. And you're telling me that you want to go home and eat this fish that's been soaking up all this scum and scuzz and phosphates from all the game fish or all the bait fish that it's been eating its whole life in a state that has some of the lowest water quality in the entire nation. I mean, you can do what you want, but I'm not going to do that. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on this one, but that's essentially why people really don't keep them. I mean, if you put it back, then it's there for someone else to catch tomorrow. And they're tons of fun. They're too much fun to not do that, in my opinion.
Personally, I don't keep any fish. I don't, and all I fish for is muskies these days, for the past, I don't know, 8, 12 years or something like that. But, here we've got a 54-inch size limit on the bay.
I would love that in
And
Iowa because no one would ever get there.
that just started in 2014 or 15.
Sure.
We actually, as a chapter, lobbied heavily to get that bumped up. It used to be 50 inches, but there were a lot of people harvesting 50 inches. So,
Yeah.
and at that time, like I said, there weren't a lot of sub 47s around to take its place. So
Right.
that put a little bit of a dent in the population here as well, but we got it bumped up to 54. And 54, that's a giant anywhere. I don't care where you're at, whether it's Vermilion, St. Lawrence River,
Totally.
Mille Lacs, doesn't matter. 54 is a donkey. So, and those are rare fish. Every year, we get a handful of really big, 54s or double nickels or above that are popped out here. But yeah, everybody's releasing those. And, even the big ones, even the ones that are 54, I don't know of a single one that was, harvested purposefully since we bumped it up.
Totally. And like, that's the biggest thing is like, if you are wanting the trophy to go on the wall, there are so many good companies that do replicas that do fantastic work, which is actually at times cheaper to do the replica than the skin mount anyways. And they look 10 times better. I mean, the best skin mount that I've ever seen is my, Callie's grandpa, his PB, that was like back in, I don't even know when, before replicas were a thing. And it looks fantastic, but it's also been stored in their basement, in the dark, in climate controlled conditions for 30 years. That's not a normal thing.
Hey, Thatcher.
Thatcher is the man. Bob,
oh yeah,
I need to tell you to get something from Thatcher at some point. So, because I think it would
hit me up afterwards.
I think it would work really good where you live. I gotta read James's thing here. How do you get your muskie charter to get as excited as you are? Smaller lakes. I live in Nebraska. What size strain of muskie do you want to stock? Well, I think that the Nebraska fish are the same as the Iowa fish. Because I know that there's a lot of trading of fish that takes place amongst DNRs for wipers, walleyes, and muskies. I think the Missouri and the Illinois ones are our fish too. I'm pretty sure. And that's not to say that you couldn't acquire them from a private place or whatever. Yeah.
And those fish are taken from the Okoboji system or Spirit?
Yeah.
Or where do they originate?
Boji, Spirit, and Clear, which I have a theory about that, and it's totally conjecture, but like you'll catch fish here, and some of them in our reservoir, some of them will be like more clear, like your classic chip flowage strain fish, and some of them will be really barred up. And my theory is that the ones that are more barred up are coming from the clearer water, like the clearer weedy water, like Boji and Spirit, versus like the ones that are not quite so barred up are coming from Clear, which is a very cloudy system, generally speaking. But yeah.
The Boji system and Spirit, they've got some amazing, beautiful, beautiful fish. And I've never seen a skinny one out there.
Well,
they're all eating well.
In the spirit of conservation, that's like one of the greatest success stories that exists in musky fishing. It's like basically you had fish reintroduced to a system, and then those fish were able to figure out how to naturally reproduce in that system. And then, they still get supplemental stocking, but like it's been proven that, they can do it. But at the same time, nature finds a way. There's a reservoir that's got a couple of tigers in it in Iowa, and they don't stock tigers anymore. So somehow, some way, one of those muskies found its way up a creek, and there's a pike there, and some things happened. So it's just it's funny how that stuff works. The base jumper is legit, James, and if you've got one, this is probably the time to use it. Muskie chasing down lures directly at the boat. Are they really that aggressive consistently? No, Ron, they are not that aggressive consistently. But the boat side eats are probably one of the coolest things in all of freshwater or all of fishing. And that's like usually what keeps people coming back. Just like the fact that these giant fish appear out of nowhere, scare you half to death, and then sometimes will eat your bait. Not always. It depends
Yeah.
on how. It's funny because like when I talk about figure eights with my friends, like I'm not going to claim to be good. I've gotten a lot better at them, but it's not like golf or like baseball where you can go to the driving range or go to a batting cage and get as many reps as you want. It's like you have to be on the water to get the reps, and you have no control over how good of a day it will be to get the reps that you want to get better at the thing that it's hard to do in the first place. It's just it's just bad math really when it comes down to it.
Exactly. And that's why you always hear, you go on the Muskie forums on Facebook or where have you, and you get a lot of newer guys coming in. Hey, I've just started muskie fishing. What's a couple of tips you can give me to accelerate my learning curve? And, there is no quick, fast answer. It's time on the water, but that's half of it. What it is time on the water with intent.
That's a fair point.
Just going out on Green Bay and casting a shark fin, it's a big shoal out we've got out here that is known for producing donkeys from August to mid-September. Going out there on opening weekend, it's a fruitless endeavor. The nearest muskie could be 8-10 miles away. You don't know. There might be one up there. You might luck into one, but they're just not there in any appreciable concentrations. So going out there, you could go out there, spend the entire Memorial Day weekend, 10 hours a day, 30 hours that weekend, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and never see anything. Well, I spent time on the water. Sure, we did, but it wasn't time well spent. You need to understand the fish migrations, things like that. And that just comes with, number one, time on the water with intent, but also fishing with others who have got more experience than yourself. And that's I don't claim to be, anything when it comes to fishing, but I am where I am today because I had excellent mentors, people who kind of took me under their wing when I first moved up to Green Bay and actually showed me, what's going on, how to approach the system, not just how to think about it. Again, based on certain bait fish migrations, certain seasonal patterns, weather, things like that. And eventually, the more time you spend out here, the more you put these puzzle pieces together and things start making sense. It's eventually going to hopefully get to a spot where you don't go out hoping to catch a fish. You go out expecting to catch a fish. Right. And that's when things really click. When I go out, I expect to catch a fish or at least have a solid shot at a fish out on Green Bay. Doesn't always happen, trust me. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes Mother Nature and the fish just aren't cooperating, or I might not be doing something right. But I go out there with intent, and my goal is to get fish in the bag. So that's one thing that it's really important is fishing with people who've got more experience than yourself, and fish with as many people as you can, because you're going to pick something up from everybody that you fish with. I get guys reach out. I had like 40-something guys reach out to me. Every year I get guys reach out to me and want to come out and fish the bay. I'm not a guide. That's one thing I want to impress on everybody here. I'm not a guide. I'm a weekend warrior. But I really get a kick out of taking people out and trying to help them think about their time on the water, especially if they're new to the system or new to our chapter for our Muskies Inc. We got a lot of younger guys coming up now, a lot. And that's something we've been focusing on heavily. Is making sure that we're getting a lot more younger folks in, because they are the future of the chapter. And those are the people who are going to be carrying the torch after we're gone, and making sure that this system is preserved for future generations. So, I take as many people out and try to help them understand what's going on out here and why we're fishing where we're at, why we're throwing what we're throwing. And, based on sometimes wind might change. Okay, now we're going to move because of X, Y, and Z factors. So, that just comes with experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Like in this sport, one of the few consistencies in this sport is just that iron sharpens iron. We talked about it this weekend. Like fish with people who are better than you, or you think are better than you, because that is the fastest way that you will shorten that learning curve. And unfortunately, like, I was listening to the Muskie Hunks recently, and I have to very respectfully disagree. I don't know. I think it was Owen who said that you can't pattern muskies, and I could not respectfully disagree with that more, because I think that muskies are very patternable. They're just not very receptive at times to what you're doing. Like, you have a good example of that with, like, you brought up the shark fin. Those fish show up. to that place at a given time at a given point in the year. Like, that is a pattern. Those fish are following a bait migration that is taking place at a very specific time, related to weather, related to moon. I don't know. I don't know the nuances of the shark fin. But what I can tell you from my experience here or in Wisconsin, like, there are seasonal movements that those fish go through that, again, they will those movements shorten your learning curve, and they make your time on the water more productive, like what you were saying. Like, your time on the water is more intentional. Your time on the water is of greater benefit to you and to those people that are in your boat. I mean, I do the weekend warrior thing. I do a little bit of guiding, but, like, again, it's about, those experiences are so cool. And just, if you can provide that experience with the limited time that you have, like, that's just money in the bank. That's just fun stuff. So, yeah.
And thing is, also, I learned a lot from fishing with guys with, maybe not as much experience out on Green Bay, but they may have some different thoughts of, for instance, in 2021, a buddy of mine reached out. I knew him from the PMTT, but he reached out and wanted to fish the bay and, really, really concentrate on it. From the opener, we're talking fishing tributaries to throughout the summer, casting out there. And we're out there one day and, we're throwing our normal stuff, our blades and rubber. And out of nowhere, he just pulls out one of those, I think it's called a jerk master. It's like 9 inches long. It's a Livingston.
Oh, okay.
And
like a twitch, similar to like Livingston's Ridgeway.
It is. It's a big twitch bait, minnow style bait with a lip on it. Doesn't get very deep. But he's out there and he's ripping and throwing. And I'm thinking to myself, what's this guy doing? Mm-hmm. Blades and rubber. But within just a few casts, he pops his PB of 49 3/4 on that.
That's awesome.
That made a bill. We catch a lot of fish on blades and rubber because that's pretty much what we throw out here is blades and rubber. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I caught fish on dive and rise, bobby baits. You can catch them on glide baits. You can catch them on top waters. You name it. But It's just that what I'm looking for is the highest percentage hookup bait possible out there, which is why we throw a lot of blades. And because you may only get one opportunity for a fish out here, only one in, say, a 14-hour day. But that one fish could be the fish of 10 lifetimes. It could be a 57. Yeah. You don't know. So you want to make sure that you maximize your opportunity and the chances of actually getting that fish in the bag. So that's why we throw a lot of blades out here.
Well, and it's just an efficiency game too, which you are bringing up an interesting juxtaposition because, like, you have this situation where there's a lot of people doing the same thing, and to be different is to probably be to your advantage. But, like, from my experience fishing in Canada, for example, we're covering a lot of water. We're doing a lot of things. The stuff that I do here in Iowa or in Wisconsin, where I'm targeting very specific areas where I know that there is very likely to be a fish, and I'm doing very specific things to trigger that bite, I can't do that in Canada. Like, we're not going to travel these random weed beds, and it doesn't make sense for me to be snapping a deuce as hard as I can for 12 hours, hoping to locate active fish. Now, if we get lucky, which is what happened this summer, and we come to a weed bed and there's active fish in there, and we know that there are active fish in there, it's like, okay, one of the easiest ways I can trigger these fish to bite that I know of and I know works is to grab a Medusa, snap it through the weeds as hard as I can, and make them eat something, which worked twice in one day. But at the same time, it's just not something that you can, quote unquote, cover water with in the same way that you would a bucktail. And at the end of the day, it's not worth killing yourself to try and make that happen when you could be working, a half-mile stretch of water, and, it might just be completely dead space because for whatever reason those fish aren't utilizing that particular spot or that particular weed bed at that time. So I don't know. I hope that makes sense to people, but that's just something that I've kind of found through my time. So Bob, like, how was the season this year? For me, I've said it a few times now, my season was really up and down, kind of like feast or famine at times. What was it like for you on the bay?
Well, our opener was cut short. We had weather. We had like 40-mile-hour winds on 2 of the days. So that wasn't, we managed to get some fish in the boat. But Sunday and Monday were just really tough sledding. But after that, we'll typically stay on the Fox for a little bit on the Fox River here in the tributaries. And just so people understand, these fish, the muskies on the bay system, a good portion of them move into the tributaries where they were stocked. And the Fox River has been the most heavily stocked area throughout the entire Green Bay watershed. And so we've got a lot of fish coming in there every spring to spawn. So those are the fish that we're targeting. We're not targeting spawning fish because the fish that we're going after typically, most of the spawn is already done by the time the opener comes around. And that's why we have it so late, that Memorial Day weekend. The vast majority of the fish have already spawned and have slid out and or are just roaming some of these flats and shorelines and what have you, just looking for meals. So we're there to give them to them. So we'll fish the Fox until these fish slide out. Most of the fish leave. There's a handful of fish that are resident fish that stay in the Fox River all year long. But thing is, in the summertime, water temps get too high. Once they start getting around 77, 78, you really don't want to be targeting these fish because, especially the big ones, because they are very fragile. And that warmer water temps and big fish do not mix. So you will typically go out into the bay. That's where we're casting throughout the summer. And we rarely have to worry about, water temps getting too high out there. Occasionally it does, but it's rare. Sure. It's very, very rare. There's just so much water out there, so much volume. And a lot of times, even if the water temps are, say, 78, you could have temps, 2 feet down be several degrees cooler,
Totally.
A big drum. So, it's kind of deceptive sometimes, but like I said, it's such a huge volume of water that we typically don't have to be concerned about it. But there are, guides do pay attention to that. And if the water temps are creeping up there, I went out with Kyle Tokarski this past summer, and, he was telling us he just recently canceled the trip because water temps were getting a little too high, and he called him, hey, we'll be happy to reschedule, but I just, in good conscience, we can't go out there with these high water temps. So,
totally.
So as far as the season has gone, unfortunately, mine was cut short. Where I really, really focus is like in September. That's where I typically do pretty well. That's when I have very little competition out there. Like I said, most of the guys are trolling, so I tend to cast a lot. But I ended up getting COVID pneumonia, so I was out for almost 6 weeks. Kind of shot everything there. So, and I've only been out a handful of times since. Just got my boat back Thursday. It's been in the shop, and I still need a new trolling motor. But I'm going out with a buddy tomorrow who's kind enough to take me out to scratch that itch. But my numbers, obviously because of lack of time on the water, have been way down. But we've been, we've been moving and seeing some fish, tops of 50s, and it's been. I'll say it was a good season. I'm very fortunate, very thankful, and we're blessed to have such a fishery here. We really are, and to have it in my backyard, it's just, I just tell people I can never move now.
Fair enough.
Why would I go anywhere else? And that's same thing with people always hey, let's go up to Canada. Why would I understand it's wilderness and everything, but why would I go up there when I've got this in my backyard? So nothing against Canadian fishing, gorgeous scenery and everything up there and lots of big fish. But so the season, last year was on fire. But one other thing about this season too is that because I think somebody mentioned early on in the chat about the weather, warm weather, things like that. We had a really, really early spring this year. In fact, when the DNR does their egg collection, I think it used to average around like May, like in the second week of May, like May 11th, 13th, 14th, somewhere around there on average for the past, say, 10 years or so. This year was the first year they actually did it in late April. That's how quickly things warmed up here on Fox and some of the other tributaries. So that meant that when we went out there for the opener, not almost all, but vast majority of those fish are already split. They're gone. They slid out and they're out in the bay, So
where do you think that those fish go? Do they just spread out? Because like it's this big thing in musky fishing where people are like, oh, the fish on the bay disappear for a couple months. Where do you think that they go, or what do you think that they do, or do they just spread out so much that there's just really no conceivable way to target them efficiently? Like, what are your thoughts?
There are specific, we'll call them thoroughfares, that these fish use on their way out of these tributaries. some of these areas are somewhat close to the mouths of these tributaries. You might see some reefs or something out there. A lot of times it's a physical impediment, like coming out of the Fox River.
Mm-hmm.
You go out, out of the Fox River, out into the lower bay, and you've got, there's a man-made chain breakwall called the Cat Island chain. Then you've got Longtail Point, which is a natural peninsula out here. And then you've got, on the other side of the lower bay, you've got Point Sable. Now, between Point Sable and Longtail Point, there's basically a ridge through there. And it's, these fish, as they're moving out, they'll stack up there sometimes. So you might see some concentrations of fish there. But what we found, though, is that's been very helpful over the years is rather than, obviously we do chase some of those fish that are exiting the tributaries, but there's other areas on the bay too where we're seeing some high concentrations of fish where we can stay on these fish. And that's been my goal since I started fishing out here, is to get on these fish all season long, from open to close, the casting season.
Sure.
And that's what we've been doing. Me and, there's probably, I could count on one hand the guides out here that will actually, take you out muskie fishing, say in late June, mid to late June.
Yeah.
Just because they're focused. It's tough sledding. Don't get me wrong, but there's fish to be had. But it's just more profitable for them to chase walleyes and smallmouth, because they're really popping that too. So, I get it from a financial. This is their livelihood. I'm just, a weekend warrior. But, we have been managing to, find some other areas throughout the watershed where these fish are concentrating in those off periods, where we can stay on these fish until they move on to that west shore, say the shark fin or some of these other shoals or little tail, once the weeds pop up. So we can pop some of these fish and get on them, in those, what we call, those so quote unquote dead times. And but you're going to have to move around. You're going to have to drive, considerable to get there. There's a lot of, bouncing around, but there are fish to be had. One thing I want to point out, however, is that, as the Green Bay watershed, like I said, it's over 1 million acres, and there's tributaries all up that west shore. You start with Duck Creek and Swamico River, then you got the Pensacola River, and, on and on and on into the Oconto and the Peshtigo, and then eventually the Menominee. And the further north you go, a lot of times those fish are usually sometimes a week or maybe even 2 weeks behind in the spawn, because the water is so much cooler up there than it is down here. So what we're able to do is we're able to tributary hop, keep going north, and stay on these fish in some of the tributaries. So that's one thing that, we found that it's been very helpful to stay on these fish. But again, back to your initial point there, we have identified some general thoroughfares that these fish follow, but again, do all of them follow these? No. And, you're not going to see fish in the same concentrations as you will, say, in the tributaries. So that's kind of how we approach things. At least how I do and my crew. I got a crew of guys out here that before the opener even starts, we're out there at least a week or two beforehand, and we're out there, we're scouting, we're reconning and figuring out where we are, how far along we are in the spawn, so we can, by the time the opener comes around, we're all talking amongst each other, and here's what we're seeing on the west shore, here's what we're seeing on these tributaries, here's what we're seeing up in Door County, here's what we're seeing on the Fox River, and we're bouncing all around, and we're out there checking. So there is work that goes into it. A lot of work, and not just myself, but a lot, like I said, I got a small crew of guys that we've been doing this for several years now, and, it's been very beneficial.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Well, thank you for all the info, first off, but kind of like as we're winding down and wrapping up, I definitely did not want to leave without talking about some baits and some things, staples that you really trust on the bay, that you really enjoy. And then I've got a couple questions with a couple of baits that I have related to the bay as well. But anyway, I'll let you kind of take it, because I know that you've got some show and tell stuff for me. And I'm really curious to kind of see what your thoughts are on some of these things.
Well, I'll turn that light off. My absolute number one moneymaker for the opener and on the tributaries is a $17 bait called a Mepps Musky Marabou, single 8, black and nickel. And I just throw a Kalen's grub on the end.
Sure.
And
what is
it gives
the
a
deal?
little extra fun.
What is the deal with the white grubs? Like, everybody talks about the white grubs on the bay. You've talked about it a bunch. I've had several other guys talk about the white grubs. Like, what is the deal with that, Bob?
It works. It flat out works. And look at, a lot of my guide buddies, every single bait I throw on the bay has a white grub. And I use the 8-inch Kalen's Octagon bows. So it's got extra thump. It's got a lot of thump plus contrast. And also it gives it a bigger profile. Up here, we rarely, I never had, well, I won't say never, but I rarely have fish bite the tail off. We don't get a lot of nippers up here.
Their mouths are huge. Like, I mean, if they're going for it, that thing's gone.
So what I do is I actually modify these with the 8-inch, and I also size up on the back hook here. I usually put a number 6 or a number 7 on there.
So it's not actually $17 anymore, is what you're saying, Bob.
It's probably like $19.50. So I tell guys year after year, you see guys out here throwing their $50 bucktails and whatever. Hey, more power to you, but I rarely throw anything more than like $25-$30 on the bay. Rarely. And so this is my number one money maker. Good luck finding them in Green Bay because I buy them all out as soon as they stock them. So that's a walleye move. So I'm kidding.
Do you upsize your hooks a lot for like the bay? Because like even on stuff like the deuces and those kinds of things, I generally will change out the hooks. It's not because the stock hooks are bad. It's just there's better ones out there. But like, okay, so what is kind of like your thought process for sizing up? Like, what is good enough to catch a 50-pound fish in your mind? Or is it just kind of like you feel it out in vibes kind of thing?
My PB came on a 6-inch Phantom. In fact, this is it. I just had to take it out of my mount's mouth here, but this Phantom right here, I got my PB on. It's a show call. I can't find it anywhere.
I've never
seen
that prism before.
Never replace it. But I did size up the hooks on these, just FYI. So I've got, I think, 3/0 on these.
Sure.
At least on the front, maybe, yeah. So I do size up. What I'll do is I'll take a bunch of Phantoms or a bunch of, bucktails, and I'll mix and match. I'll put a 6/0 on one, 5/0 on another, 7/0 on another, and it's also the gliders too. I'll mix in twitch baits a lot. I'll mess with the sizes because sometimes I want a lot more hang on, say, a twitch bait. I don't want it to rise as fast, so I'll size up on the hooks, but I also don't want to diminish the act. So that's critical. And there you eventually reach a point of diminishing returns by sizing up. You're going to deaden the action, and you're not going to get that bait to do what you want it to do. But like I said, the 6-inch Phantom is a very highly overlooked bait out here. Almost everybody's throwing blades out here, like especially for the opener. It's probably 50-50 for me now with glide baits. So we typically I have 2 guys that come into town every year been doing it for like 11 years. One of my college buddies who lives in Minnesota comes in, and my PMTT partner, Aaron Stack from the Milwaukee area comes up, and the guy in front's throwing blades, guy in the back, typically blades, but might mix it up, and the guy in the back is doing something else. We want the guy in front to have as many opportunities as possible with the highest percentage hookup bait, and then the next guy can follow up with maybe blades, but maybe a spinner bait, a safety pin style spinner bait, and then the guy in back can kind of mix and match and mess around with whatever he wants. So, and we just do that until we figure out what's going on, what's working. Certain colors might be hotter than others. And one thing you got to realize is that, once is a fluke, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. Just because you get one fish, let's say, a black and chartreuse or whatever, doesn't mean that that's the hot color. If you start moving a lot of fish on that, okay. So there's often times where all 3 of us are throwing the same thing. We're all throwing a musky marabou or what have you. So It all depends on the year and what's going on. But yeah, the glide baits, very highly overlooked, and I would really recommend them because they're good show me baits too. A lot of times, when you get out a new system, like we've fished up on Buckataub a couple weeks ago for that musky battle, I was throwing glide baits a lot, and first 2 fish we moved came on that. Actually, the one we actually had one on was on another glide bait. So just to make sure that, okay, number one, are the fish in the area? Are we in the right area? Because these fish will move on them. You get to see them. But and then you may have to, tweak from there, and maybe move on to something else, maybe a twitch bait or what have you. But it's a good search bait. But as we progress through, another thing, another good one, something like this, the Booker 700 series.
It's exactly what I caught my first muskie on.
There you go, 700 right here. This one's got fish on it.
I pretty much just throw Rusty's glides at this point. I've had my ass kicked enough that like it.
I got
just,
one.
You won't regret it.
I picked up one of those 6 suckers, I think it's called.
Yeah, no,
and I loved it. But for when I was working up in Door County. We're working like anywhere between 7 to 10 feet of water, and looking for fish just roaming out there looking for bait. And I wanted to get it down just above the weed tops. So what I did, sized up on the hooks on that, and the action on that was just unbelievable. So I threw that quite a bit. Unfortunately, I didn't throw it as much as my other stuff because I mostly throw blades up there. Sure. But I really, really like the way that thing moved, and I'm gonna put a lot of hours on that thing. It's just
different, man. It just does something a little bit different. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the blade. I don't know if there's some mojo in there. I don't know if it's the color. But like Brian Scaife has kicked my ass the last 3 years, I think, on those things, and like even Ben, like he went up to Canada and caught a 4-footer on one. Like the results speak for themselves on those deals. So I'm excited to throw mine more, and I think I've got a couple of protos of his coming in that I'm really excited about, actually. So that they should be really good come spring.
As we move on to the summer casting bite, what we're typically throwing is your bigger bucktails. This is a Kramer Brothers window maker. Not sure if you can see, but they come with conspicuity tape on them on the blades. They're reflective tape like DOT tape. But you can see these are just trashed. Fish just absolutely hammer the blades on these and shred the tape on them. So I'm constantly replacing the tape. But this right here has been responsible for a lot of big fish out here. Obviously, you got the 8-inch octagombo on there too. What we also do is, what Kramer does is he's got the stinger hook up top.
Yep.
A lot of guys will take the stinger hooks and put them just above the skirt. What I do is I move it up as many beads as I can where it's still not interfering with the blade. Because what we're seeing, again, a lot of these fish are just hammering the blades, head hunting. And when I move that hook up, I noticed that the hookup percentage increased quite a bit.
I know that the Pandemonium Marvin 88s have been crushing up there.
88, 78 out here on the bay, they have been absolutely destroying fish out here on the Pandemoniums. I've got some of those, but I fish mostly window makers. Cowgirls
makes me super happy for Kevin, because like the dude, he's an awesome dude. He's been super helpful for me, and like I pretty much exclusively use his leaders at this point, and like he makes awesome baits, awesome dude, hard to beat him.
The only time I use something different is when trolling. Obviously, we're going to be using some 3 to 5 foot fluoro, but I'm throwing the Pandemonium Roswell leaders on my glide baits. The 7-inchers without the swivel, and then I'm using like a 9-incher, 9. I've got some 12-inchers, but I know guides out here that fish the 7-inchers on blades, but I throw the 9s with the swivel on them. And then again, I've thrown a lot of 9s these days just because I'm old and I don't want to beat myself up. But 10s were they ruled the roost for a lot of years up here. But heck, in 2021, this bait right here is a little custom I had made. I'm not sure if you can read that, but it says Joe Boo on the back. This it's a 6'8".
Interesting.
A buddy of ours popped the 53 within like 75 yards of us, and he got a black and gold. I'm looking through everything I've got. I don't have anything black and gold except for this little guy, and I bought this for like the Eagle River area. So had it made at a local musky shop up there, and this thing just tore it up. A buddy of mine, I had him use it, and he almost had a 3-fish day the first day that day. He popped 2, and then another one lost at the boat, but also several other fish that year have been come on this. And this is, I use this for guests. This is if they have problems throwing some of the bigger blades, I give them that. And it's a number 6 Indiana and a number 8 Colorado. So it's a 6'8" stagger.
Cool.
And
That's
then
cool.
obviously for rubber, you've got your dogs, mag dogs, Medusas, obviously. You don't really need to go to the Husky Medusas or the Pounders out here. In fact, a lot of guys have been tearing it, and Jeff Vandermortel, a buddy of mine, has been tearing it up on what they call the new pit bulls. Had a lot of success on those. I haven't thrown them out
It's a
here
really
much.
good size.
It is. So those have been very successful, but also your 10-inch Poseidons.
Yeah. A lot
They
of
came
fun
out with
on
the
those
8-inches.
Poseidons.
Yep, and also tune them, bend the head down. They give a little more wobble, not just a tail thump, but they give a little more wobble. So we'll turn the heads down on these to kind of tune them a little bit, and you get a little more wobble to them, and that seems to be the ticket out here. But
yeah, Rick,
I know they came out with
Alpers gave me that tip too, and that is
really
that's a good one. Yeah, he said that to me at the Minnesota show, I think. I was going to ask you, Bob, do you ever throw like giant blades, like double 13s? Like this is a Dadson double 13. I threw it a bunch this fall. I just didn't have a lot of success generally on blades this fall for whatever reason. But do you throw stuff that big ever, or is it just like
I don't.
pretty much
And
your
the reason
like
being,
small to mid?
I reel lefty, and there are some drawbacks there. Is that for the longest time, I used to have a lot of 12, 13, stuff like that. I got rid of them all back in like 2014, 15 because there just weren't any left-handed reels that could handle them. So I was very limited as far as what I could throw, so I just got rid of them. Nowadays, you've got some reels out there. My number one reel is the Revo Toro S. The white one, it's got a 5.3 to 1 gear ratio. I throw my blades and rubber with it. Now, it's a very low gear ratio for rubber, but again, a lot of it, I'm not throwing a lot of the Poseidons, so it's basically a straight retrieve. I can speed up or slow down as needed. And then I throw a lot of tubes also. Unfortunately, I didn't bring any tubes with me, but tubes are deadly out here, and not enough people fish them. I got my first tube fish out here in like 2014 or so, 15 maybe. I think that's the first tube fish I have heard of out here, and that was a 50 and a half. And from then on, I've just been throwing them. So
you keyed me into the tubes probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago before they really came into popularity. But I don't throw them as much as I should. But I also have like all this rubber. I have all this rubber that I'm like confident in that it's like finding a spot where it's like, oh, I would feel so much more confident throwing a tube than I would a Medusa that I've caught, hundreds of fish on, or a bowfin that like would pull fish in the Northwoods when nothing else would react to anything. And it's like, I don't know. It's all confidence. You know how it goes with musky fishing.
Obviously, actually visualize exactly what it's doing on retrieve, and that's important also, depending on where you're fishing. Make sure you're visualizing what your bait's doing and getting it to do whatever you want.
That's a really good tip that I don't think enough people think about, because like with the Ridgeways, for example, I have such a cop-out answer when people are like, well, how do you work it? And I'm just like, I try and make it look like it's alive. And I'm sure that response probably means something different to everyone else. But at the same time, I don't really know how else I would describe it. I mean, kind of the traditional JBO, like hybrid style retrieve, but at the end of the day, it's not that either. So I don't know. I totally forgot too that like the Musky battle and the PMTT, I forgot to ask. I mean, like, I didn't even think. I'm just gonna have you on again or something to break down all that stuff. I forgot that you were like one of the OGs with the PMTT and probably have more stories to share than like I have time.
I'm not an OG. Not an OG, but I fished it for a few years and did okay.
Yeah. So are those mostly the baits that you wanted to run down? I don't want to throw off your flow here.
Just quickly, I know we're getting on time here, but
no, dude, you're good.
The other thing I want to say is, I'm not much of I don't troll a lot, but for anybody that does troll right here, you're super shad. These things are the ticket out here. I know one person who's ever caught a fish trolling on a headlock out here. But there's guides out here sometimes that they may have 3 guests in their boat, so they can run 3 lines per person, including the guide. Mm-hmm. So they got a 12-board spread, and every single one of these will be a super shad, either perch or fire tiger. They are just deadly out here. And there's other, baits too in that same general profile, but you don't need to go super big out here. You don't want to go too small either. But this is the name of the game out on the bay, and it's no secret. Talk to any guide out here, and this is what they're doing. And these things, again, are what, $14? So
yeah,
you can't go wrong. One other thing though is that we have, for our Titletown chapter, every year we've got a fall outing, and it's our league championship. Also in 2019, I won it on this, and this is known as a J-bow. It's called a Cover 6, a J-bow. I don't even know if this guy makes these anymore. I got these years and years ago, but they're basically a mini headlock. They've got the same type of.
That's awesome.
And they've got that wander or that walk to it. It'll wobble, and all of a sudden it'll kick out to the right, then left, right, left, all over the place, and pop the 49 and change on this thing.
When, I think I remember watching that. Did you put out a video of that one?
I did, yeah. I've got a video on my YouTube
channel. Yeah. No, that's awesome.
This is the bait right here.
That's a cool looking bait, dude. It kind of reminds me of, it's like a hybrid between those trucker lures and then like your matlock headlock kind of thing.
Exactly. Just shorter, and they've got a great wander to them. And the thing is, we don't typically want a lot of that, but what we were throwing out there, we're pulling a lot of these that day, and we weren't getting any action. So we thought, because typically the fish out here don't want a lot of that stuff. They just want a little wobble to it, steady, but we weren't getting any action. So I threw that on I took a flyer, basically. I just said, okay, I'll throw this on, and boom, it worked. So again, fluke, but could be a fluke, but who knows?
I don't know. It never hurts to run something a little different in a sea of super shad wraps. I think that's definitely a good option. Kind of as we're winding down here, Bob, like what are your goals for 25? Do you have any big goals set for the coming year, whether that be like conservation, stocking, fishing, whatever, what have you? I'm curious.
First off is still working closely with our Titletown chapter on the conservation end of things, working with University of Wisconsin Stevens Point. They have a fisheries department for their master's students that are actually doing some studies out here on the bay. We did a radio telemetry program from 2017 to 2020 where we captured 60 fish and put radio transmitters in them. And so those have been swimming out in the bay here ever since, and those transmitters typically last for about 10 years. So we're still able to get some data from that and find out how these fish are migrating, things like that. But those were primarily done in the studies that we did after that, trying to find young larvae, hatching, the tiny fry, and find out where they're spawning successfully. Because we've got a 7-mile stretch here on the Fox River where we've got thousands and thousands of fish that come in every spring. But according to the students, less than 3% of that entire 7-mile stretch is suitable habitat for spawning. Less than 3%. So these fish are coming in here and going through the motions. There's very, very little natural reproduction. There is some natural reproduction out here. Don't get me wrong. We catch fish without fin clips. We catch fish without pit tags in them. Here's a pit tag reader. A lot of the guys in our chapter carry pit tag readers. So anytime we capture a fish, we basically turn this on and we just wave it. You can get it within like 2 feet of the dorsal fin on either side, and it'll ping. And then you'll get a number on that. Just take a picture of it. It actually stores the number too. But a lot of our guys are using these and getting more data for the DNR to help them build a database with the more information. So that also a lot of the guys in our chapter, and we're trying to expand it this coming year, whereby guys are actually trained and registered with the state to put pit tags in themselves. So if we capture a fish, we can put a pit tag in them. I know one of the guides out here that I fished with last summer, Kyle Tokarski, they gave him a box or a bag of like 50 pit tags, and the day we went out there with him, he says, I ran through those. So he's got over maybe 100 we got 5 or 6 guys out there right now that are pit tagging fish. So we maybe got, close to 100 fish out there tagged that weren't tagged before. So that's more data that we can get for the DNR. And also, if that fish is recaptured or captured, during the fyke netting, we know where that fish was caught, and we get some history on that fish. So that first part of the telemetry program was done on tributaries. Now that just started this spring, I've been working with UW Stevens Point, myself and another guide out here, Chris Barch. They want to do some.
Dude is a hammer.
You have nobody has. He's the Green Bay Ghost, but he's hands down. He's the top guy out here, and I recommend him to everybody. There's a lot of guides out here that are buddies of mine. Just that he and I, we started fishing the bay at the same time, and he just spent a lot of time out here and put in the work, and he's got these things figured out. But nevertheless, the UW Stevens Point reached out to us and reached out to me and said, hey, we want to start doing some surveys out in the bay itself, because we know some of these fish are actually spawning in the bay, out not in the tributaries, but in the bay proper. So what I did is I gave them, I think, like 30-something spots where I've seen throughout the bay where I know where fish are. We've seen fish paired. And then Chris, I just gave him general areas, made the maps and everything. And then Chris gave them actual waypoints, like, 25 waypoints or something where he's seen exact spot where fish have been. And these students went there, and I remember I got a call from one of the lead researcher out there, the PhD head of the fisheries department, said, hey, what's that first spot you gave us? And boom, we saw 3 pairs. So that's
nuts.
That's pretty awesome. So hopefully we're going to get some great data there as well. So continuing to work with them.
Super
also,
cool.
fyke netting every spring. I spent a couple of weeks, not just on the Fox, but also up in Gore County, doing some fyke netting, going out with the DNR, emptying the nets and doing fish counts, things like that. So anywhere I can help get more data, that's what I'm doing. As far as fishing is concerned, I just go out and, have fun. That's what I want to do, and fish with as many people as I can. And I never set any goals like I want to catch a certain size or anything. My main thing at my age now is I know the big fish are out there. It's just a matter of time before you hook into some of these.
Right.
But what I focus on is mechanics, ergonomics, making sure I'm as efficient on the water as possible, making sure that I got a bad shoulder, I got bad everything these days. So I want to make sure that I'm doing everything as economically as possible from a movement standpoint. So I try to focus on posture, things like that, so I can last longer on the water and keep up with some of these young bucks. So that's basically what I'm going to focus on every year. You do things right and the fish will come. And that's kind of my philosophy.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. That's part of why I run, and a lot of my training now in the mornings is more endurance focused, because the things outdoors that I enjoy most require it, whether it's, fishing for muskies and being on the water for 10 to 14 hours, or, walking for pheasants, or trying to hunt some ducks. All those things, to be at your top level, you have to be efficient, and you have to put in some work to be as efficient as possible. The last thing that I want, when you're on the water and you're uncomfortable, you're out of the game already. And the longer that you can 100%. Stay comfortable, the longer you can stay focused, and the odds of success are that much greater. So not to sound too preachy there, but
it's good to be preachy, especially you're guiding now and you get people in your boat. I don't want to say militant, but as far as solid figure 8s, and be prepared for every single cast, because your next cast, as I mentioned earlier, could be the fish of 10 lifetimes. You never know, especially out here. So it breaks my heart when I'm out there and I got some people fishing with me, and there's a giant that swings on their bait and they just do a hairpin or a bobby pin figure 8 side to side instead of big loops or big loops. And they just lost an opportunity at a really, really big fish. And like I said, it breaks my heart, but, you just kind of try to impress upon them that, hey, listen, there's a reason why I'm finishing every single figure 8. It looks like a lot of extra work, but sometimes you're working on your figure 8. And I've been out with some guys who've got live scope in their boats, and we've noticed that when we're doing our figure 8, that fish may still be 20 feet out, just sauntering in slowly. He knows it's out there. And you just do one little turn, one L turn, and pick your bait out of the water. That fish, where'd my meal go? scoots.
Right.
So it's important to be thorough with your mechanics.
I could
It's
not
going to
agree.
up your game immeasurably. Your success rates are going to go up immeasurably.
I could not agree with you more. Well, Bob, this has been super insightful. My phone is about to die. I cannot tell you thank you enough for coming on. This has been like so interesting, and I hope that people who watch this or were watching it live found it as interesting as me, because this was like it was great. This was like my nerd senses were tingling the whole time. It was fantastic. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your
Thank you
knowledge.
for the opportunity. This is what I live for. This is my passion. So always happy to talk Muskies with you. I know we've talked Muskies, a few times in the past, but anytime you want to talk in a little more detail about anything out here, maybe a little more on the fishing side of things, we'd be more than happy to, help folks get kind of a little dialed in, at least get them pointed in the right direction out here, because it's a lot of water, but it fishes small. If you know what you're doing, you know where to be at certain times of year. And also, I just want to give one quick shout out to my buddy Ragnar out there, out in Michigan. Just want to say hi. Long time no hear. Hope you're doing well, brother.
Yeah. And Bob, I know you've so graciously offered for me to come and fish with you so many times, and I promise one of these days I will take you up on it. I just gotta figure out.
I gotta get the Ridgeway boys out here. I gotta get the Ridgeway boys out here too. So let's make it happen.
Yeah, that would be super sweet. Thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. I'm gonna probably make a frozen pizza. I'm getting kind of punchy, so I hope you have a great rest of your evening. And thank you so much, dude. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Matt, and thank you to everybody who chimed in here. Really appreciate you guys showing up, and best of luck to everybody this coming year.
Yeah, Thatcher, you're coming on soon too, so don't think you're safe. It's gonna happen. But anyway, thank you so much, Bob. I'll catch you hopefully on the water sometime. See you, dude.
All right. Sounds good. Take care, brother. Bye-bye.